All right, so we just got through talking about traditional event handling. So let's take a second and talk about W3C event handling. If you don't know, the W3C is the World Wide Web Consortium. All right, so they came up with their own approach for how we should create event listeners. And the biggest advantage of this approach over the traditional approaches you'll see is that we'll be able to create multiple event handlers for the same element, which we said was a drawback of the traditional approach. All right, so uh, for the W3C approach, event listeners handlers are created using the add event listener method. All right, now this method takes three arguments. The first argument is going to be the event type. The second argument is going to be the function to be called when that event occurs. And the third will be a Boolean value that represents what we call the event phase that we'll talk about a little bit later on. But for now, just know that you can just always set it to false and it'll just be skipped. So let's take a look and look at how, let's look at our previous example where we set a function for the onload to be called or when the form was submitted. So let's do this. So when the form was submitted, it would call these two functions. All right, and we had to put this little ugly piece of code in here to call both of them simultaneously, because we could not use the traditional approach to do so. So let's do it with the traditional. With W3C. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a init function in here real quick. All right, I'm going to specify that this init function gets called on load. All right. All right, so let's add an event listener for that form. All right, so in here, when it inits, we want to create the event handlers for that form. So we still use our document dot get element by ID, and we called it the form. All right, now I'm just going to get a reference to the form. All right, so that gives us the form, right? Now let's add an event listener for it. So we're going to say window add event listener. All right, and remember we said our first parameter was the event that we want to listen to. So it's not going to be on submit, it's going to be submit. All right, what's the difference? On load, on submit, these are what the properties are called on the element, but the actual event name is load, submit, click, etc. So you just take off that on part. That's just when you're trying to use it directly on or assign that to the property itself. All right, so the first part is our event. So we're listening for the submit event of the form. All right, actually, sorry, we need to add it on the form. Okay. And the second one is going to be the function that we want to call. So in this case, we want to call process. All right, notice no quotation marks around that, and we're going to add the last parameter false. All right. Then we can add one for submit. So notice we can use the same event. This one we're going to use calculate and false. All right, so we added two form event listeners. So when the submit action occurs on the form, process is going to get called and calculate is going to get called. Now be careful because we don't have any control over the order of which those execute. All right, so be careful with that. And if we wanted to remove the event listener, before we could set it to null, this time we're going to use remove event listener and the name of the event. So we're going to move submit, and from the calculate one. Well, let's just remove the process one. We can still use false. All right, so this will remove that event listener. So the net effect here is that when the submit event fires, only calculate will execute because we just removed the event listener for process. All right. Always remove event listeners once you no longer need them, right? So you always want to do that. And also remember that with the W3C version of this, it works. The only browser that it doesn't work with is Internet Explorer prior to version 9. Okay, so it works with all browsers except the Internet Explorer version prior to IE 9. All right, and we'll look at another way of doing that for older versions of IE. Take care.